Hello and welcome to Rebecca's Finance Tutorials. I'm Rebecca and it's lovely to meet you, and whether it's your first time here or you're back again, welcome. Okay, so this is video 3 of our Principles of Costing series, and today I'm answering some of the questions that you have sent to me from the community about this unit. So there were loads of great questions, so let's get straight into it, as we always do. So the first question was, what's the difference between a cost unit and a cost centre? Now, a cost unit is the actual thing that you're costing. So maybe one chair, 1 hour of consultancy, one meal in a restaurant. Whereas cost centre is actually a location or function within the business where those costs are collected before they get shared out. So that might be a department, or it could be a machine, or it could even be a whole production line. So just think of the cost centre as where the costs sit first, and the cost unit is what you're ultimately trying to find the cost of. So a useful picture, I think, here is that a factory might have 3 cost centres, so cutting, assembling and finishing, and every chair that passes through all 3 is one cost unit. So picking up a share of the cost from each cost centre along the way. So I hope that helps. Now, second question, and I get this one a lot, is does it actually matter whether we use FIFO or average cost? Won't they give roughly the same answer? And the answer is no, honestly, because prices moving up and down over time can make a real difference to your final figures. And FIFO tends to value your closing inventory closer to current replacement cost because it assumes older, often cheaper stock has already gone. So the average cost smooths everything out, so it's less sensitive to any one single price change. And in your exam, you'll be told which method to use. So your job is not to choose between them, it's to apply the method that you're given correctly and consistently right through to the end of the record. The third question is, how do I know which basis to use for absorbing overheads? So this comes down to what actually drives the cost in that part of the business. So if department is heavily automated, machine hours is usually the sensible basis because the overheads, things like machine maintenance and depreciation relate to running the machinery. If it's a labour-intensive department, labour hours make more sense because the overheads there relate more to people and supervision. So in your assessment, you'll normally be told which basis to use. Focus on being confident with the calculation itself. Total overhead divided by total basis multiplied by the basis used per unit or job. So I hope that helped. Fourth question, what's the actual difference between direct and indirect labour again? Okay, so direct labour is the people physically making the product. So a machinist on a factory floor or a hairdresser actually cutting a client's hair, that is direct labour. Indirect labour supports, for instance, the production but doesn't touch the product or service itself. So a supervisor, a quality inspector or maintenance staff. So again, direct labour is a direct cost. Indirect labour is treated as an overhead. And a quick trick to ask yourself is, if this person didn't come in today, would a specific unit simply not get made? And if the answer is yes, that's usually direct labour. My fifth question is piecework the same as a bonus? No, and this trips a lot of people up. So piecework means that you're paid a set rate for every unit you produce. So your total pay depends entirely on your output. So if you work faster and produce more, then you're going to earn more. But a bonus is usually an extra payment on top of a base wage. So often for hitting a specific target, like producing over a certain number of units in a week. And you could easily have someone on a standard hourly rate who also earns a bonus. That's completely different, and it's a different system from someone who is purely on piecework with no base pay at all. So just a quick pause here because I do want to mention as always my community because it's completely free to join. And again, I've left a link in the description section below. And it's where these questions came from. So over 400 of you are already there, which is incredible, using those free resources. So if you're not in it yet, come join us because it costs nothing at all. Now, sixth question, what's the difference between an adverse and a favourable variance? I always get muddled. Okay, so think of it from the business's point of view. If actual costs come in higher than budget, then that's bad news. So it's adverse. If actual costs come in lower than budgeted, that's good news. So it flips the income, because if actual income is higher than budgeted, then that's favourable. And if it's lower, then it's adverse. So a tip that helps a lot of students is always ask, is this good or bad for the business? And let that decide the label, rather than trying to remember a rule about higher or lower numbers in isolation. You don't need that in an exam. Now, the seventh question is, why do we bother flexing a budget at all? Why not just compare actual to the original budget? That's a great question. And if a business budgeted for producing 8,000 units, but let's just say they actually produce 10,000, then of course variable costs like materials will be higher. So that's not bad management at all, that's just more output. So flexing the budget means adjusting it to reflect what actually happened in terms of activity. So you're comparing like for like, or as close to, and any remaining variance genuinely reflects good or bad cost control, rather than just simply reflecting a change in volume. So that's why. Eighth question is, what's the high-low method actually used for in real life, or is it just an exam topic? Okay, good question. So it's actually genuinely useful, and businesses often only have total cost figures at 2 different activity levels, rather than a full breakdown of fixed and variable elements. Now, the high-low method actually lets you estimate that split using real data that you already have, and that then allows you to predict costs at other activity levels, essentially, which is hugely useful for budgeting and pricing decisions. So it's definitely useful in real life. Next question, which is number 9, and this one came up a few times, which is, why does my inventory valuation answer keep coming out wrong, even when I think I've used the right method? Okay. So almost always this comes down to workings, not understanding. So students try to track FIFO or LIFO issues in their head, or they just jump straight to a final number. So I would recommend setting out a proper table every single time, even if it feels monotonous, because it really will help. So you want receipts, issues, and running balance with quantity and value columns, and just work through that every single time with every transaction in date order. This one, I would say, is almost like comparing the hare and the tortoise, because slower and correct beats fast and wrong every single time in this exam. So yeah, I hope that one helps. And 10th question, do I need to memorise one specific layout for a cost card, or does it vary? So the content, I would say, matters more than a rigid layout. So a cost card should build up from direct materials plus direct labour plus any direct expenses to give you prime cost, and then add a share of overheads on top of that to reach the total cost per unit. So as long as you show that build up clearly in that logical order and label each line, I promise you, you'll be fine, even if the exact formatting differs slightly from question to question. Christ, 11th question. Could you run through a quick high-low example? Seeing the numbers actually helps me more than the theory. Yeah, absolutely. So let's just say at an activity level of 2,000 units, total cost is £14,000, and at an activity level of 3,000 units, total cost is £17,000. So the difference in cost between 17,000 and 14,000 is £3,000, and the difference in activity is 1,000 units. So £3,000 divided by 1,000 gives us a variable cost of £3 per unit. Now, if you take the high point of the 3,000 units, variable cost of £3,000 multiplied by 3, which is £9,000, and then we subtract that from the total cost of 17,000, that leaves 8,000 as the fixed cost. So this cost sort of behaves as £8,000 fixed plus £3 per unit variable. So you could check it against the low point too. If we had £8,000 fixed plus 2,000 multiplied by £3, which is 6,000, that gives us 14,000 in total, and that matches. So that confirms that we've split it correctly. So those are some brilliant questions, so thank you so much for sending them in. You can always pop those in the comment section below for a future video, or your next exam, you can pop them in the comment section below, or even you can join my community. So if you've got more, as I say, do drop them in the community and I'll pick them up in a future video. So thanks for joining me as always, and I will catch you at the next